Competitive sports are spectacles in which athletes and coaches determine who is ultimately superior in their respective disciplines. To do that, these people will
play to win the game.
When we watch the athletes and coaches, they will succumb to a wide spectrum of emotions due to their competitive nature before, during, and after their games, matches, and meets. Happiness, joy, heartbreak, sadness, confusion, cohesiveness, cockiness, timidness, resiliency, calm, passion, compassion, frustration, anger, and pure unhinged rage. This is the understanding that we all have with athletes at all levels, as they have dedicated their time, and in some cases their entire lives, to get to where they are and put it all out on the playing field. That, in culmination with the moments they experience, result in unforgettable displays of emotion. But in these situations where athletes let their emotions get the best of them, there's an element that will always remind the athletes of how they are currently feeling, for better or worse.
Westbrook, you suck ass! Lakers are 0-2. Lakers return home this Sunday afternoon, 12:30 tip-off against the...
Fans are the variable that can amplify events from the unforgettable final moments of a game to an interaction that will turn us against our own players. For some people, fandom is a way of life. It is a bond that has brought families and friends together. People have spent large amounts of money on merchandise and apparel to display that fandom loud and proud. The entirety of a fan base will all be there when their teams reach the highest of highs, but the most dedicated will be there for the lowest of lows. When teams make baffling decisions, inexplicably do things during games for no apparent reason, or sink to the depths of hell, the fans will undergo the same emotions as athletes during these tough times and put them on display. I'm going to tell you all about one specific display of emotion by a fan base who had been beaten and battered all season and were expected to catch a break in their future, but were ultimately abandoned by God. Many sports fans consider this to be the most heinous act in the history of sports, and is constantly mentioned nearly 60 years later as a testament of how savage and rabid the city's fan base is. This is about the time the Philadelphia Eagles fans booed and threw snowballs at Santa Claus and ended up on the naughty list. In the year 1960, the Philadelphia Eagles won the NFL championship against the Green Bay Packers. Unfortunately, over the course of 8 years since the Eagles won the championship, the team had been steadily declining as they missed the playoffs every season since their championship win in 1960. By the end of 1968, the Eagles were in a full-blown downward spiral. Through the first 11 games of the season, the Eagles lost every single one of them and were even blown out in a few of them. They had the worst record in the NFL, and the faithful Philadelphia fanbase had to watch this team week after week and get their skulls bashed in. And there was nothing to do but watch the onslaught. Following Week 11's 13-47 loss to the Cleveland Browns, Eagles fanbase was calling for the firing of their head coach Joe Kuharich because he wasn't getting the job done and the team wasn't improving during his tenure, but the front office was reluctant to pull the trigger and remove Kuharich from his position and decided to wait out the remainder of the season to do so. So the fan base had to watch this train wreck for 3 more weeks until the season was over. But there was a light at the end of the tunnel for the Eagles in the midst of all this losing, and that light was shining in Los Angeles. Now for a brief digression.
With the first pick in the 2019 NFL Draft, the Arizona Cardinals select Kyler Murray, quarterback, Oklahoma.
In the world of professional sports, there are events called drafts, which have the intention of trying to level the playing field amongst teams from season to season. In the NFL, if a team has the worst record in the league that season, then that team would have the opportunity to pick first in the upcoming draft to choose who they want to be on their team moving forward from all the talented and eligible candidates from that draft class. The team with the second worst record would get the second pick, and that pattern continues. And during 1968, there was no other player who had more potential than a 2-sport stud athlete from the University of Southern California. This young man held relay records, possessed world-class speed, and in his 2 seasons playing football at USC, he was the runner for the Heisman Trophy in 1967. He then followed that season by actually winning the Heisman in 1968 by rushing for almost 1,900 yards and rushing for 23 touchdowns. This young man was incredible. He was a future superstar. He had a charming personality, he had swag, he had the juice, and his name was O.J. Simpson. Okay, listen up. I already know what some of you are thinking. Don't worry about all that. All you need to know is that right now, the year is 1968, and O.J. Simpson was going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread, and whoever had the worst record at the end of the 1968 season was going to draft him and have a future so bright that they needed shades. But before the Eagles could reach the Holy Land, they had to continue their pilgrimage of ineptitude. They had to make a stop in Detroit and play the Lions. The Lions are a good team. They have won 3 games already this season, which is already 3 more than the Eagles. This should be an easy loss on the way to getting OJ. Hey, Detroit, what's going on up there? What's the deal? What's going on? Wait, no. Why did we just win? Does the Eagles front office are the Eagles front office aware of what's at stake right now? Okay, at least at the moment the Eagles still have the worst record in the NFL, but let's just check the AFL to see if we're on the right track to get OJ. Oh God, we're tied with the Buffalo Bills for the worst record. Oh God, no. Oh man. Okay, you know what? No big deal. Just lose the next game to the New Orleans Saints at home, and no, God, shit. Fuck. Oh God, no. Fuck. No, God, no. Don't show me that Buffalo lost too. Oh my God. Can this team do anything right? So, we're not getting the first overall pick. No more OJ. I mean, the Eagles had nothing to gain by winning in the previous 2 weeks, but everything to lose. And the fans were pissed going into the final game of the regular season at home against the Minnesota Vikings on December 15th. The fans in attendance were wearing buttons that said, "Joe must go," in reference to their head coach. Someone took it a step further and hired someone to fly a plane and have a trailing banner saying, "Joe must go." The Eagles fan base were very vocal about how much disdain they had for the team that they loved so much. And the fans were willing to support them no matter how crappy the conditions were. The night before the game on December 14th, there was a massive snowstorm, and Franklin Field was filled with it on game day. There was an effort made by the groundskeeping crew to clear the field by kickoff and moving it onto the track, but there was still an abundance of snow in the stands. And when the fans arrived on the afternoon, they had to maneuver the snow in the streets of Philadelphia and in the stands. But due to the snow, there was one person that was unable to maneuver to Franklin Field for the game. That person had a very important job to do, and he couldn't make it. As part of the halftime show for that regular season finale, a Christmas pageant was supposed to take place and feature Santa Claus. Unfortunately, the man supposed to take on the role as Santa was stranded in northern New Jersey due to the snowfall the night before. Therefore, Bill Mullen, the Eagles director of entertainment, had to improvise and think of something. Mullen was looking through the stands throughout the game to find a viable solution, and he found it sitting along the 40-yard line. He saw a man dressed as Santa Claus. "20-year-old Frank Olivo and his cousin Richard Monastra were part of a large family with 9 uncles and near 30 grandchildren. And each year, the family got together and had Christmas party at the grandmother's house. According to Richard, one of their uncles, Charlie, would fill the role as Santa and hand out gifts to the family as he had the proper build to play Saint Nick. But he recently lost a lot of weight after being hired and worked at his new job as a longshoreman. So Charlie passed the mantle on to his nephew Frank. Since Frank already had the outfit, Frank decided to wear it to the Eagles game for shits and giggles. Richard, Frank, and other members of the family were attending the game and were approached by Bill Mullen. To be a part of the halftime show, why not? It could be a lot of fun. What could possibly go wrong? The Christmas show was supposed to be a planned, orchestrated event in which Santa was supposed to make his entrance through that gate over there on a float dragged by mechanical reindeer. While this was going on, the Eagles cheerleaders were supposed to be accompanied by a 50-piece marching band playing Christmas songs, and Santa was supposed to be making his entrance on the float while the band was playing. Now, as of the making of this video, Franklin Field has turf installed on the playing field, but in 1968 that wasn't the case, as a combination of grass, snow, cold weather, and one half of a football game being played degraded the conditions of the field. The float made its way from the tunnel onto the track and then onto the field, only to get stuck. Santa unfortunately had to abandon the float. With everything going horribly wrong and the fans unsure of what the hell's even going on, new instructions were given. Walk with the cheerleaders and the band from one end zone to the other, and then walk along the track, and on top of that, carry this Eagles duffel bag as a replacement for Santa's sack. Now for those watching, I want you to keep in mind that the Eagles were a bad team. A team that was so bad at being bad that they failed to be bad when it mattered most. They won 2 meaningless games, and those 2 meaningless games are ruining their chances at drafting a once-in-a-generational talent. But they still had a chance, but they took an early 7-0 lead in the second quarter and the fans weren't having it. The Vikings were tied up before halftime, but the damage was already done. The Joe that the fans said must go isn't gone, and he's still on the sideline coaching the Eagles. This team can't get anything right, to include the halftime show. It's cold, it's miserable, there's snow in your seat, it's impossible to get comfortable, and with the Philadelphia Eagles fan base already having a reputation for taking their team very seriously as a way of life, is anyone surprised at what happened next?
Boo this man!
You wanna fuck him up? Yeah, I do.
Frank Olivo became a punching bag for everyone in attendance to release their frustration onto. He had to bear the burden of the organization that disappointed their fans and made bad decisions like not firing their head coach or not having slapped together a competent halftime show. Olivo was a fan first and foremost, but in these moments, he was on his own island and he had to fend for himself. He wasn't a fan. He was the face of the franchise. And that same franchise was disappointed in Frank Olivo for his performance despite the circumstances and giving his best effort. Jim Gallagher, who was the Eagles' director of public relations, stated that Olivo had a bad suit, scraggly beard, and was undecided as to whether he was inebriated. Needless to say, he was very unsatisfied. But Gallagher also went on to say that Olivo was the worst looking Santa I'd ever seen. After the halftime show, the Eagles would lose 17-24 to the Vikings. Joe Kuharich would in fact go after the game as he was fired by the Eagles. And the team finished with a 2-12 record. The Eagles would in fact miss out on drafting O.J. Simpson and have the 3rd pick in the 1968 draft behind the Buffalo Bills and Atlanta Falcons. O.J. would go on to have a Hall of Fame career and by his retirement would go down as one of the greatest running backs in NFL history by leading the NFL in rushing for 4 seasons and would win the 1973 MVP. After retirement, he would become a media personality in which he became a broadcaster for Monday Night Football and also an actor for most notably the Naked Gun franchise. He also drove a white Bronco on the Los Angeles freeway one afternoon and put on a glove with some blood on it. You may have heard about that. The following year in 1969, Franklin Field would have turf installed on the playing surface to ensure that no parade floats would ever get stuck in inclement weather conditions. Despite the improvements to Franklin Field, the Eagles would move out and relocate to the newly constructed Veterans Stadium a few years later in 1971. The Eagles as a franchise tried to get to the mountaintop that they once reached in 1960, but failed to do so for many years. The Super Bowl has served as a successor of the ultimate championship game in American football since 1966, when the top teams from the AFL and NFL would square off and be named champions. For over 50 years, the Philadelphia faithful fan base would ride with this team no matter what and be met with disappointment after disappointment and become the laughingstock of the NFL with their lack of a Super Bowl win. And that December afternoon in 1968 served as a reminder why the Eagles fan base deserved nothing, according to the national media, as the incident proved that we all deserved a lump of coal in our stockings. But sticking with this team was rewarded in 2018 as the Eagles won their first Super Bowl, defeating the New England Patriots. There are many fans waiting to see their favorite team win the Super Bowl for many years. Watching professional and college sports have become events where family and friends bond together over a common theme. The time spent together is important, but if they win, then that's just the cherry on top. Some of the people who wanted to see their teams hoist the trophy in the air are no longer with us. Unfortunately, the man who took on the mantle as Santa Claus passed away before he was able to see the Eagles win the Super Bowl in 2018. Frank Olivo died in 2015 at the age of 66 after battling heart issues for the majority of his life. But even up until his death, Frank Olivo took it all in stride and never took any part of the incident personally. He never held a grudge against the Eagles who hung him out to dry, nor did he hold a grudge against the fanbase who turned his day into another person's worst possible nightmare. He pretty much had a "it is what it is" attitude towards the whole incident. In 1969, the year following the incident, the Eagles reached out to him and asked if he would make another appearance, but Olivo turned down the offer. Philadelphia's NBA team, the 76ers, organized an event to set a record for the most people dressed as Santa Claus in one place during a home game against the Orlando Magic. Frank Olivo would participate and be the headliner of the group of Santas. The 76ers fans cheered for the Santas initially, but then they realized that they were Philadelphia sports fanatics and they had a reputation to uphold. The arena was thunderously filled with boos as it was cemented that Old St. Nick in Philadelphia would be synonymous with booing. But even 3 decades after the fact, Frank Olivo took it all in stride and never took it personal. When commenting on that 76ers game where he reprised his role as Santa, Olivo said, "It made me feel right at home. I grew up with these fans, I'm one of them. But they didn't throw anything at me, and that was a good thing."